From Fox 8 Sports, this is the Overtime Podcast.
From the Fox 8 studios in New Orleans, this is the Fox 8 Overtime Podcast, and I am your host, Sean Fazende, riding co-pilot, ride shotgun, Andre Johnson Jr. Got to make sure to add the junior at the end of the name.
Got to throw the junior in. Andre Sr. will be very upset if you don't.
So, Andre Sr., we hope we are showing you the proper respect with the title. But before we get started, be sure to like, share, rate, review. If you are watching us on YouTube, be sure to hit that subscribe button, get the bell notification whenever we upload a new video, a new podcast, some more content, and we're tweaking things a little bit. We're coming at you on a Thursday instead of the Friday, just to get out ahead of a few things, just in case some things could potentially break over the weekend and into next week. So we decided to go ahead and do it a day early. Today was an interesting day as we got resettled here back in this, or at least myself got resettled back here in the city of New Orleans. Some news that popped, but first and foremost, Andre, how are you doing on this Thursday?
I'm doing good. You know, this Thursday is actually my Friday. So
okay.
I'm looking forward to the weekend, take a little time to myself, kick back, relax, get some good food.
That's what we do. That's what we do. Ain't nothing wrong with that. That's how we do it down here in New Orleans, and you and I are both New Orleans guys. So,
yeah.
A lot of news, but we're going to tackle two topics today that are kind of intertwined when you talk about the players, the position, and the current state of the Saints. So why don't we start big picture? So, Andre, what is our big picture topic today?
Big picture topic is now there's talk about Derek Carr potentially restructuring his contract. If you guys remember, Derek Carr, when he came here, signed for 4 years, $150 million. But as things are looking for the Saints right now, Sean, they are about $83 million under the cap. And they only
over the cap.
Yes, over the cap. And they only have about a month to fix it. They're going to have that sorted out by March. Now, Sean, the Saints have showed us in the past that they are masters when it comes to salary cap gymnastics. But what do you take out of this newest development?
Yeah. Well, first off, it's you know the math that they use, the process that they take to do the gymnastics, as you call it, to do the juggling with the numbers, and they have to do it. They have no choice. It's not like they could just choose to not do it. They have to get under the salary cap. But Derek Carr, according to Luke Johnson, is likely to restructure. Hasn't happened yet, but he is likely to do so. I was actually going to do a pod on this next week, but since Luke got the scoop, we can discuss it now. First off, let's get to the math portion of this, and I'm going to try to not get you guys too far into the weeds with the math of this. I think a lot of y'all understand it by now, at least the basic premise of this, but I'll just do my best to explain it for those that do not. I've been asked about it a few times on other shows that I've done on other platforms, other radio shows, other podcasts. My answer was always the same. This has to happen. This has to happen from a purely mathematical standpoint. I have done my best to crunch the numbers with the Saints in their current salary cap situation. As you said 83, somewhere estimated in the 80 million over the cap range. The biggest amount of space created was always going to come, at least from what I was looking at with the books that I was looking at, a Carr contract restructure. As a general rule, at least recently, the Saints do not keep high base salaries on their books. It almost always gets converted into a signing bonus or some other kind of bonus where it's able to spread the difference of the conversion over the life of the contract, thus lowering the cap hit. So when I see Derek Carr has a $30 million base salary in 2024, my immediate thought is, let's get him converted. It would free up. Now look, it depends on how much they convert into the signing bonus, but according to my math, and again, this is not exact math. This is all projections that I get from websites like overthecap.com and spotrac.com. But if my math is in the general neighborhood, it would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $20 to $25 million in cap space. Again, it's just a cap number deduction. Remember, and I know most of you guys already know this. You've probably seen my interview with Kai Harley last year. And also, you've consumed a lot of Saints content if you're on this podcast to know that this is a pretty basic move that they do. It's not a pay cut. Carr is not losing a dime. He still gets his money, but now he gets it all up front in one check as opposed to the weekly installments that they would get during the regular season. Or however they do it now with whatever the base salary would be, that's how they do the checks when you have a high base salary, but now the base salary would be lower. But the difference is obviously comes in one big check by converting it into a signing bonus, which you get all up front. If they didn't do this and carried Carr's entire $35 million cap number on the books or whatever it is, I think it's last time I checked was $35 million cap number.
Right.
Where else would they go to find enough space? We're talking about $83 million over as a team.
They'd have to go everywhere.
I mean,
almost.
even with, make no mistake, even with doing this, they still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah.
You could do the math. If I said it gives you $25 million in space at most, and you're at $83 million, well, deduct 25 from 83. Where you're at, you still got work to do. So they still have a lot of work to do. If they don't, I mean, they would have, like you said, they would have to restructure or add voidable years to basically the entire roster, which is kind of what got them into this. They did a lot of it during the COVID year, which they kind of had to, but which has kind of caught them over the last couple of years, but they've had to do to begin with to create the present day space. So Carr won't be the only one they restructured. And really, if you just go to those sites I mentioned, it's not really hard to figure out who could be next in line for this type of restructure where you chop the base salary down, convert it into a signing bonus, or however they do it. I know the Lattimore one was a little bit different. I still don't quite understand that one, but nonetheless, the one that they use the most often. Just look at who has the higher base salaries. I think Eric McCoy jumps out as someone that could potentially restructure. Right. There could be others, and there could be the different type of, there's certain guys with roster bonuses that could be converted into signing bonus, which is the same deal. They still get the money, but now you can divide it over the life of the contract to create space. I would think that's at least 2 or 3 players that they can do that. So math-wise, I think this always had to happen. I think it was always structured for it to happen. And football-wise, I think it means exactly what it suggests. By restructuring a second season, does this guarantee a third season with Carr in 2025? Now, look, ballpark estimate math here. Again, I'm not down to the decimal point, but it makes it way more likely. If my math is right, it makes it way more likely that Carr is back here in 2025. They could still get some small relief if they wanted to move on after next season, but not much. So, yes, if this restructure goes through, there's a greater chance he's around in 2025. But back to the bigger picture, it's simply this. Don't lose sight of this. They want this to work with Derek Carr. That's the bottom line. The Saints still believe in Derek Carr and feel like he's a part of the solution going forward, at least in the immediate 2024 term. This is why we spoke yesterday. You asked me about the quarterback scenario, about drafting the quarterback early.
Right.
I'm not convinced they are. It's possible, but I'm not convinced they are for this reason. DA is tied to Derek Carr, and if they want to work with Carr and they want to see it work, well, drafting another position in the first round will probably be the more immediate route to take if you still had that belief organizationally about Derek Carr.
You mentioned they want this to work with Derek Carr. I think they need this to work with Derek Carr because
Absolutely.
Drew Brees fell out of the heavens into New Orleans. He did everything that he did for this city. And then after that, you haven't been able to find anybody anywhere near that caliber. At first it was Teddy Bridgewater, baby, he's the guy. You bring in Jameis Winston. Taysom Hill had the experiment for a while. Dennis Allen had a heavy input in bringing in Derek Carr, and now those two names are tied together. So if you're Dennis Allen, if Derek Carr doesn't work, not only will one day Derek Carr be out of New Orleans, you're going to be right there with him.
No doubt about it. DA, I mean, this was the first time as an organization since Brees where they said, you are our guy based off the contract that they signed. Yep. Again, it wasn't a record-breaking contract or I guess you could say broke the bank, but in terms of NFL quarterbacks, I've always said this is the 13th highest paid quarterback in the NFL. So I guess in NFL quarterback terms, it's somewhat of a middle-class contract, but it's still huge money to give to a guy, and they're not going to give up on it after 1 year. They're just not going to do it. And as you mentioned, DA is tied to Derek Carr, and like you mentioned, it went from Teddy Bridgewater to Taysom Hill to Jameis Winston to back to Taysom to Andy Dalton. Even Ian Book started the game. Derek Carr is the next one, but he is the one that they organizationally have all kind of been all in with, and I think this potential restructure, now we should also point that out, hasn't happened yet, but likely to happen, makes fiscal sense and in football sense, despite the fact that many are not on board in the fan base with Derek Carr. I've always been a little higher on Derek Carr because I felt like the finish to the season and some other things that were happening, I felt like he was playing a little bit better than perhaps he was getting credit for. And the frustration with him and the fan base was a little out of control. We'll get to that in a second.
Yeah.
But I do think all in all, this is their way of saying they're behind him. And I think they're going to roll with it. And they know next year a lot's on the line. So, if it doesn't work out in 2024, I think there's going to be a lot of decisions being made that both include Derek Carr, but also other people in the organization as well.
Absolutely. And I think right now Derek Carr is kind of in that middle ground. You mentioned a lot of Saints fans not very thrilled with Carr. He's not as bad or he hasn't been as bad as a lot of people may think, but he's also not as good as maybe a lot of people may hope. You mentioned that he is the 13th highest paid quarterback in the league. At this point, you're kind of getting what you pay for because if you want to talk about passing yards, Derek Carr finished 13th in passing yards this season, 10th in passing touchdowns this season. It's not bad. It's not obviously MVP caliber. It's kind of middle of the road quarterback, a quarterback that's good enough to get you to where you want to be. But the question starts coming in whether he can take you over the top.
Yeah, and I think he's steady at the quarterback position. I think of the names we mentioned, I think he's post Brees. I think he's the best one. I'm just gonna be fair. I think he's better than the other guys that they've started since Derek, between Carr and Brees. So I think he's good enough. I just think their belief is going to be, all right, well, let's get better around him. Let's do. And look, and that's not to say Derek Carr didn't make mistakes, because my goodness, he made mistakes this year, and he mishandled certain situations that he could have very easily avoided. But I think organizationally they've made their decision, and when it actually happens, the official restructure happens, it won't come as any surprise to me.
Absolutely not. And while we're talking about the current Saints quarterback, we might as well talk about a Saints legend, another quarterback, Drew Brees, a guy we just mentioned, in town today, opening up a slider spot over on veterans. And you were able to talk with Drew Brees for a little bit.
Yeah, I was able to go check out the new business venture in Metairie off of Clearview and Veterans, a heavily traveled spot. So for a burger joint, a sliders joint like that, it's certainly... it's a good location, one of the most heavily traveled intersections in the greater New Orleans area. Drew Brees back in NOLA. First off, gotta give my guy mad props on the flow. The flow is working. As a hair aficionado myself,
Can relate. Yeah.
Drew's due is looking outstanding. He was in a good mood. He was in a great mood. He was in, he's done this before. He understands how it works. And he looked, the flow was working. So whatever he did, whatever he was able to do to all of a sudden have the resurrection of the of the dew up top, it's certainly working out. Secondly,
career glow right there.
Yeah, it really, hey, good for him. Secondly, what an interesting, this is more kind of the day of thing, interesting scene out there, because didn't realize it was the grand opening as well as the ribbon cutting. And I thought it was just going to be a ribbon cutting, do some interviews, kind of informal, but that was not the case. It was, we did our interviews, then the ribbon cutting, then Carr started pouring in the drive-thru, which is where we were doing the interviews, was where the drive-thru is.
Yeah.
So it got, I don't want to say chaotic, but it got busy really, really quick, and it just was, it wasn't what I was expecting. I thought it was just going to be kind of an informal. I've been to ribbon cuttings before, just kind of a, hey, we're open to do some interviews. It's pretty lighthearted, but no, they were first day of business, so good for them. I talked to a guy who said they had cars lined up at 7 a.m.,
Man, the first person in line for
Thursday
Drew Brees'
morning?
new restaurant, he's got a story to tell.
And he's there high-fiving and getting the customer base interested. Look, he's an entrepreneur, he's a business owner, so more power to him. He certainly has made his investment as he promised he would, both foundationally and charity-wise, but also from a business standpoint here in New Orleans. Which, look, I'll say this, and we'll get back on topic in a second. I had a conversation with Zach Streif back when he opened his brewery a couple of years ago.
Right.
I said, Zach, some of the players are missing an opportunity. I understand some of these guys are going to do the foundation work and the charity type stuff and help, those in need, but there's also, you could help those in need by opening up businesses and creating, a booster for the economy, create jobs, that kind of thing. And he agreed. He said more athletes should be involved in investing in business and job creation. And I think Drew has certainly done that. As for the matter at hand, I was the one that asked Drew Brees today how important this hire was for Dennis Allen. And he said it's huge, very huge. And he's quickly said, if you are building around Derek Carr, which we just went through all the reasons why we feel like they are still in strong belief in Derek Carr,
right?
He has to have input. He has to have input on the search, on the decision, on who they ultimately go with. I wonder, and I hope that is truly happening, because when Mickey Loomis was asked about this in his end-of-year press conference, he said something. Now, I don't want to confuse. I don't want things to get lost in translation, but when he was asked about, do you consult or do you have input from Derek Carr, he says that's not something we would ask a player to do. So I hope some kind of way there's some kind of collaboration, some kind of way. Either the guy so well in Derek Carr that you know what he likes, know what he doesn't like, so we don't necessarily need direct input, or maybe he's given some suggestions as far as what he would prefer as an offensive coordinator.
Right, because when Mickey Loomis initially said it, I started kind of scratching my head, because it's not like Derek Carr is a rookie. Derek Carr isn't a third, fourth, year quarterback. Mm-hmm. He's a veteran quarterback, and that's almost what you would expect when you have a veteran quarterback, is for that quarterback to have input in the guy who's going to lead his offense. And when you've got a guy like Derek Carr who's been around the block for so long, you've got a guy like Derek Carr who's seen several offenses, and a guy who you have hitched your wagon to for the next 4 years, it's almost bizarre to think that you would hire an offensive coordinator who's going to ideally be around with Derek Carr for at least the next 3 years without at least talking to him and seeing what he thinks. And I think the same thought process was echoed by Drew Brees today.
Yeah, and I thought he was pretty emphatic with it. So I thought it was probably one of the more noteworthy. He said a lot of good stuff. I thought it was one of the more, at least in terms of relevance in the moment and what the Saints are going through, pretty newsworthy thing that he said today when he said, you've got to have Derek Carr's input. So I just hope that's happening. I would think that's happening. I mean, why wouldn't it? Like you said, I mean, why wouldn't it?
Right.
He also talked about, he was asked about the fans' frustration and the booing. Did it surprise him? Did it frustrate him? Whatever. And he basically said, nah, man. Like, I would take that as a compliment. They have high expectations. They should have high expectations. Now, Drew had a lot of success here, and Drew had to deal with many boos.
Yeah, I don't remember a time where he was booed like that.
I think he has seen the glory years here, but he was the freaking reason for the glory years here. So I think it all makes sense, which is funny because I bumped into a couple of I guess people around the organization, not in Metairie, earlier in the week, and they both were just like, "Oh, number 9. When you got number 9, you got a chance." It was all roads led back to Drew when it came to just kind of reminiscing about the past there. So he's firmly on the side of the Saints fan base. Didn't surprise me at all that he would be like that. But I think he also makes a good point that, look, they'll boo you if they're mad, but when you do good, there's no other fan base better. So I think that's where you have to live if you're a player dealing in this city with this fan base, and just understand that, passion works both ways. And this is a passionate fan base, and you'd rather have a passionate fan base that cares as opposed to an apathetic fan base that doesn't really care about anything.
Absolutely. I was in Ohio before I came back down to Louisiana, so I covered the Bengals games during their Super Bowl run. And I remember when I got there for game 1, I'm from New Orleans, so I'm from the Dome. I'm from the who dat, not the who they.
Right.
So when I get there for game 1, my first time in Cincinnati, I'm thinking the stadium's about to go crazy. Now, granted, they're coming off an awful season, but, I was almost surprised how dead that stadium was. And it really didn't, by the end of the season when they, won their first playoff game in 30 years, it was up here, but like in the Dome, whether they're winning, whether they're losing, it's going to be a party. And it's almost a shell shock when you go other places and realize it's not like that. Like, that Superdome is special, and Drew Brees, he's seen the best of it. Like
absolutely. And look, I've traveled to every single NFL stadium except for one, and I will get to that one.
What's the one?
The one is Kansas City. I still haven't been to Kansas City.
Man.
I will have the opportunity to do so next year. And it's not hard to figure out where the passionate fans are. Like, that surprised me about Cincinnati a little bit because I remember they've had a long history of losing, but they've obviously had some success over the last couple of years with Burrow. But like, you go to Pittsburgh, it's exciting. You go to Philly, it's exciting. It's lively. Dallas the same way. But if you go to like, sorry Falcons fans, if you go to Atlanta, I mean they got fans arriving about midway through the first quarter. You go to like Arizona, not necessarily the case. So you'd rather have that. You'd rather have that. The Saints fans, a fan base that's going to be there, be loud, but also be loud in disappointment if you're doing bad and wrong things, as opposed to kind of a casual fan base that doesn't really quite have the high-end passion that you would look for as a player.
Right. Like I literally watched the Steelers. Pittsburgh came to Cincinnati, and their fans were out chanting Bengals fans. Mm-hmm. The Packers came to Cincinnati, and the Bengals fans were trying to chant "Who Dey," and they got drowned out by "Go Pack Go" in a home game.
Yeah, Green Bay's another one.
Like that's a place where I wouldn't want to be in that place as a player, to where I'm supposed to be having a home game and the away team is out cheering my fans.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we had to deal with that a little bit this year with Detroit.
Oh, yeah. Detroit
it was such a shock to everyone because it never happens.
Right.
But that happens all the time in other cities. So just keep that in mind from when you talk about players and the fan relationship. So
right.
Don't know how good you have it sometimes because of how passionate the Saints fan base is. All right. Anything else?
Another thing that Drew said that was very interesting to me, he talked about, when he was talking about the offense, the offensive coordinator, he spent about 3-4 minutes talking about how the offense under him, kind of in his latter years from, say, 2017 to 2020, how the offense really evolved under him, how they were watching the Sean McVays and the Shanahans, and a guy who he likes a lot today, and Mike McDaniel. He was kind of watching offenses with those guys, and he called the NFL a copycat league. They would just steal things that they wanted, and they managed to still continue to win games even in the latter stages of Brees' career because of the way that the offense was able to evolve. And it's ironic because that's honestly the reason why Pete Carmichael isn't here anymore, is because that offense, no matter who was the face of it, we talked about a lot of quarterbacks earlier, it wasn't able to evolve. It wasn't able to take advantage of Derek Carr's strengths,
Took too long. It just took too long to get there.
Right.
It took too long.
You mentioned all year, the play action is his strength, and they really weren't utilizing that a lot. And Drew was very complimentary of Carr. He called Carr very talented. He said that there's, quote, no reason the Saints shouldn't be a top 5, top 10 offense. And they're not far away. They were 14th last year in all of the offensive headaches they gave fans. So there's a window. There's a pathway for them to be a top 10 offense if you can get the right guy leading that ship.
Yeah, and he was pretty open about the McVay and the Shanahan thing. And he was, I wonder, when you talk about Drew, I mean, I was around Drew for however many years he was here and covering him. Such a type A, headstrong, intense personality in terms of football. Peyton was the same way, another offensive-minded guy, and then Carmichael. So it was 3 guys kind of eyeing the league as opposed to maybe just 1 or 2 with Pete and Derek Carr. You just wonder how much that played a role in it as well. But nonetheless, they got a big hire to make. Drew knows it. Everyone knows it. Everyone knows it. And hopefully that was going to be the topic of this pod today, but Drew and Derek gave us a couple different topics to talk about, so we were able to pivot and get to this discussion here today. Programming note: we are not going to be on Friday, as we mentioned. This Thursday podcast will replace the Friday podcast this week. We'll see how next week goes, and then we'll see what happens over the weekend with the offensive coordinator search, and then we will adjust accordingly, like everyone seems to do. For Andre Johnson, you good?
I'm good.
He's good. All right. Andre Johnson Jr., excuse me.
Andre
Johnson Jr.
You don't want those angry emails from Andre Sr. He will send them.
I don't want it, Mr. Johnson. I don't want it. I promise you. I am Sean Fazende. We'll catch you guys next time on Overtime.